Kלים Perikei Mishnah Gimel. We're continuing with a stove. Remember, a stove is a kli cheres, which is mekabel tumah, because the gzeres hakosov, that although it's mechuba lekarka, we learn that from a pasuk that it's still mekabel tumah b'teres tano v'kirayim. And the stove, remember, looks something like this, on which one can place two kederis. And the Mishnah says, Ateres kira tohira. The atara of a kira, the crown of a kira, is tohir. The crown of the kira, you can see here, in this picture here, you've got the kira, which is your cylinder at the bottom, is the stove. And then on top of the kira, there's another cylinder which sits on top. And the pot is placed in that top cylinder as an added protection, an added shmira for the heat. And that's called an ateres kira. And the Mishnah says it's tohir. Now we have a machlokes rishonim how to learn this. The Rambam and the Rash learn that this atara, this secondary cylinder which sits on top of the main kira, is actually just sits there, is actually not mechuber to the kira. And when the Mishnah says tohir, it doesn't mean it's tohir legamri. It means it's tohir with the tumah of the kira, i.e. if the kira becomes tomei, then the atara doesn't become tomei with it. And vice versa. If the atara becomes tomei, then again the kira doesn't become tomei with it, because they are two separate kelim. The atara itself is able to be mekabel tumah in its own right, because it's a separate kli sitting on top of the kira, and the word Torah just means that they don't become tomei because the other one became tomei. The other way of the learning is the Rosh's way. He learns that the atara of the kira is actually fixed to the kira, but it's still regarded as a separate kli. So we have a situation where the atara is a separate kli, but it's still b'mitzias mechuba lekarka. And the normal rule applies that anything which is mechuba lekarka is not able to be mekabel tumah. Although there's a special gzeres hakosov for the kira itself, that although it's mechuba lekarka is able to be mekabel tumah, that gzeres hakosov doesn't apply to the atara, because the atara is not a kira. So the atara is a separate kli, not being a kira, but still tar in ganzen cannot be mekabel tumah at all, because it is mechuba lekarka via the kira. That's the ratio of the Mishnah of Ateres kira. Let's move on to tiras hatanur. We're now going back to the tanur, remember, which is our cylindrical object fixed to the ground, used for baking. And around the outside of this tanur, one makes a little chotzer. There's a fence, and this fence has a base. I'll show you the picture here. And again, the question is here, is the tira, this chotzer, which is wider, the point of this chotzer is that when you take the bread out of the tanur after it's baked, you put it in the chotzer to cool down. So it's really a tashmish of the afir of the baking of the tanur. Says the Mishnah, Bizman shi gavoya dalet tfachim, if the chotzer, the tira round, has got the minimum shear of a tanur which itself is dalet tfachim, and if the tira is dalet tfachim high, then metama b'maga uva avir. That means it's a complete chibur to the tanur itself. B'maga uva avir means it doesn't make a difference whether the tanur becomes tomei through its avir. That means the sheretz was held in its toich, or the tanur became tomei because not only was the sheretz held in its toich, the sheretz actually touched the inside of the tanur as well, or vice versa. If the sheretz touched the toich, was put into the toich of the tira, or even touches the inside walls of the tira, whichever way around, the A becomes tomei, B becomes tomei with it. Or B becomes tomei, A becomes tomei with it, because they're considered completely to be one kli. This Mishnah actually brings up a very important principle in chibur. The poskim talk about, the Mefarshim talk about here, whether the tira, how is the tira mechubur to the tanur? It does seem that actually the tira is just touching the tanur, but not actually stuck to it. But yet, the fact that it's called one kli makes it a chibur, although it's not stuck. You can have one kli which is made up of different bits, and it's possible some of those bits are not actually glued or stuck to the other bits, but yet it's considered one kli because they're touching, and therefore part A becomes tamei, part B becomes tamei with it, and vice versa. And that's what's happening here with the tira, which is attached to the tanur, although not stuck to it, but because it's got the height of dalet tvachim, it's considered to be part of the tanur, mamish one kli, and no matter how the tanur or the tira become tamei, the other one becomes tamei with it. The relevance to magaun avir, because we've never had the concept before of having touching, a difference whether the kli cheres picks up tumah through avir, or because the thing also touched it from the inside, would only become apparent in the end of the Mishnah where we make a chilik. Mishnah carries on, Bechusa mikam tahira. If the tira is less than 4 tvachim high, it's tahira legamri, because of it fails the height requirement of a tanur, which is dalet tvachim itself, as we saw in Mishnah Aleph. The tira, if itself is less than 4 tvachim high, is bechlal not regarded as being part of the tanur at all. It's not even a yad. It's got nothing to do. It's not a shem kli. It's failed the test of a tanur miserably, and therefore is not considered to be part of the tanur at all. And if the tanur becomes tamei, the tira does not become tamei with it, and the tira cannot actually become tamei by itself. However, says the Mishnah, im chibra loi, if he then affixes, not just touches it, he actually is mechaber the tira to the tanur. This tira, which was less than 4 tvachim high, if he actually sticks it and welds it onto the tanur itself, then afilu al shalosh avonim, even though the tira is not actually sitting on the floor, it's actually being supported separately by 3 bricks, but it is stuck to the tanur, then tamei, under all circumstances, it becomes part of the tanur because of the physical attachment that it has to the tanur. Okay, let's come on to the sefer of the Mishnah. Now we're dealing with a kira, back to the case of a stove, and now we're dealing with attached to the kira is another base kibble. You have the kira on one, so you have the main, they have the kira. I'll show you, try and show you a picture here. Right, here you are. Here is your kira, your main stove, and on the side there are smaller little receptacles, attachments to the kira, with their own kibble, their own toich, with their own separate function. For example, says the Mishnah, Beis hapach u beis hatavlin u beis haner shebekira. Attached to the stove is a little cup-like attachment in which one puts the pach, a little jar of oil. The oil is too hot. You want the oil to cool down, so you leave it there. Or beis hatavlin, you want to put spices into the food, so you have a few little trays stuck to the kira in which you put your tavlin, your spices, and when you need to spice the food, you remove the tavlin and put them into the food. So they're actually doing a separate function from the function of the kira itself. Or beis haner, or there's a lamp holder stuck to the kira. So here we have really one kli cheres made of 2 separate receptacles. One has a function of cooking, the other has a function of holding a lamp or oil or spices. Comes along Rameh and he says an interesting din. Metamin b'maga v'enon metamin ba'avir divi Rabbi Meir. Really what Rameh is saying is, mido eraisa, there is no chibur. They are 2 separate kelim. We've had this concept before. Sorry, if you have a kli, cheres, made up of 2 separate receptacles, each separate base kibble has its own chashivas, and they don't form one kli. And if you drop a sheret into receptacle, into base kibble A, then it's only that base kibble that becomes tamei. The other base kibble becomes tar because the other base kibble has its own chashivas. And this we saw at the end of Perik Base, in the story of Beis Tavlin Shel Cheres v'Kalmarin Hamtu Omois. or tavlo she malaya ka'oros. Nitmeis achas and hem besheretz loy nitmu kulon, because each one has its own toich, its own base kibbutz, its own chashivas. Midaraisa, that's clear. Comes like Rameya, and he says, although Midaraisa, each one has a separate identity and doesn't pick up tumah from the other one, however, Midrabanon, we're geyser a chibur. Because it's only drabonon, and we want people to know that this tumah is only drabonon, so they were only geyser the chibur in a case of maga, which means only if the sheretz, not only the sheretz enters the toich, the airspace of one of the botei kibbul, it actually also touches it. Now, and really, there's no concept of maga with kli cheres. There's a long, actually, simon in the Stipler, Kilis Yaakov, for whether there is maga b'kli cheres on the inside. That's not for now. Says Rameya, and with Rabbonon we geyser that if the sheretz actually touches the inside of the base kibbul, of either the base hapach or the kira itself, then we say that the other one is mechubar and becomes tummy with it. However, if the sheretz is just nitlo ba'avir of either one, then we keep the deraisa rule that each one, the one that had the sheretz, that's the one that becomes tummy, the other one remains tahor. It's a gzeirah midrabanon that there's a chibur lemaga only. And Rabbi Shmuel in the Tyre, the Gershon Rabbi Shimon in the Tyre, he says there's no din drabanon. The normal rule, the Raisa applies. They are completely separate kelim, separate toichs. And if one becomes tomei either through maga or avir, then the other one remains tahor, because they have no chibur, there's no connection, and it's exactly the same case of the tavla shimleya ka'oros, which we did above in Perik Zayin, in Perik Beis Mishnah Zayin.